Bienvenue sur le podcast de changement de vitesse. That means hello and welcome to the Shift Gear podcast in French that I should speak, but I do not speak. I am from Canada, and we just watched our national team lose to Argentina, and I am sad, and we are sad. But I've had a lot of enjoyable drinks tonight, so this is gonna be a fun one. Just got home from the bar, and the boys were waiting for me, and they said, "Hey, we have a sick top 10 list of the most degen cards to ever hit the earth." So that's what we got for you today. My pleasure to introduce our special guest, Curtis Lyon. Curtis, give us a little wave.
Yo.
He's back. We brought him back. He was so good the first time we brought him back by popular demand. And we're excited for this one. Curtis is a guy who's been around the game a very long time, longer than us. So he has a lot of insight on what has happened through these years. And as we go through this list, you're going to see that there are a lot of years encompassing the most degen times in the game, and a lot of it happened around base set. So we tried to not make this list an entire base set list. So we did our best to kind of throw it all around. But let us know what you think in the comments. Ciaran, what are your initial thoughts of our 13?
I think this is a fun episode. I think we've done a lot of these history episodes. I think the reception's been really good, and I think we've enjoyed making them. And I think, we brought Curtis on because when you do some history, you want to get some of the OGs on. So if anyone wants even more background on Curtis, we did a great episode with him, maybe a month or so again. But no, this list was really fun to make, just kind of reminiscing, I hate that card, this card was stupid, all that.
That was basically the reception to every single card.
Yeah. So
I hate that card.
No, I think it'll be good. Before we start, I kind of want to go over the criteria I think we kind of used when we made the list. So I think probably the number one criteria we used was this card made the game unfun. It's just unfun to play against. Kind of detracts from the experience of playing. I think another thing we kind of added was does this change how formats are played? Do you have to build your deck or keep this card in mind as well? And then I think our last piece of criteria was what was our last piece of criteria, Curtis? I'm already blanking.
We wrote it down somewhere.
Yeah, I definitely think it's did the card ruin the skill ceiling?
Oh yes, that's what it
skill
was.
Gap in the game? It's just did the card just enable you to lose to stuff you otherwise shouldn't have lost to? Which there's going to be a couple of them on this list.
For sure, yeah. So it's good to go over that criteria just so everyone knows how we kind of made this. As usual, we all came with our own 10 card lists. We kind of combined them, talked to each other, and we made this list for all of you today. Before we get into it, I want to thank Noah Kaiser for this hat. This is pretty dope. He shipped it out to me. We love Shift Gear gifts, and shout out to him for shipping me out this hat. This is dope. It's also reversible, so I might just reverse it at some point in the video, and y'all won't even be able to tell. And if you saw me wear this on the Sunday live stream, no, you didn't. So I pride myself in debuting new hats every time, and I might have goofed there. But
also thanks.
I'll have you guys know. Yeah, sorry.
I was just say thanks everyone for coming to our live stream. By the way, that was really fun. The first Shift Gear live stream. I think Aneil and I had a great time, so I think we'll definitely do that again in the future.
It was dope. So. We loved it. Hopefully, by the time you're watching this video, I have the Shift Gear Discord set up. So I'm gonna put that pressure on myself. Aneil, if tomorrow, you better make this. So I'm gonna make that Discord. I forget what I was gonna say, but it don't matter. Anyways, all right, let's get right into this. So we're gonna start with Ciaran. Actually, you have the list, so why don't you take us through this?
Yeah, so we're gonna start with 3 honorable mentions. There's a lot of degenerate cards, so if we didn't say one that you guys think should have been on the list, let us know in the comments and make the case for it. We probably considered it. I think a lot of us said us three disagreed on some, but our first honorable mention is we're going all the way back to the very first set. We have energy removal and super energy removal. So Curtis, I'm going to kick it to you. Why don't you start off by explaining why these cards are so poorly designed?
Yeah. Daniel gave me the layup. But honestly, I think with the base set stuff, I think what we as a group kind of struggled with was it almost felt like everything was so degenerate back then. How do you even quantify it being poor game design if everything felt poor? But specifically with energy removal and SER, for those that are unaware, it was a free punching hammer, and the super version of it was you binned an energy yourself and you popped 2 of theirs. And I just kind of felt when we talk about the criteria for not necessarily lowering the skill gap, because I think there is skill in knowing when to do it and when not to do it, I definitely think it makes for a less fun experience. And it obviously gatekeeps certain things from ever becoming playable, because back then it was obviously all these big basic decks that took advantage of low energy costs but higher damage outputs. And so you're really just kind of put in an unadvantageous position where you just like never really would be able to stabilize energy you ever had. I mean, that just kind of feels unfun. I feel like maybe if they produced that card with something like some sort of like energy retrieval or some way to like recover energy, like bulk energy and shuffle it back into your deck, maybe it wouldn't have been so bad. But I almost feel like if you were to go back and play like base set or jungle, or fossil and you like remove those cards entirely, I feel like you would have an entirely like way more fun format.
Yeah. I think the thing that's so poor about those cards is like a lot of the Pokemon in base set, like they're like had like attackers that needed a lot of energies. And most decks besides Rain Dance didn't really have energy acceleration. So like you would set up your like big attacking guy, and then they're just like, all right, energy removal, super energy removal, like this thing is useless now. And there wasn't really a way to combat that. Like there wasn't like tools didn't exist back then, so they couldn't make one where it's like, okay, block that. Like you said, energy retrieval and like night maintenance came in later sets. Like even we saw when promo Mewtwo came out, it was so good because it got energy back. So I just think it gate kept a lot of cool cards in the format. And when you go back and play, like a lot of the decks that see success are ones like Wigglytuff, 1 energy can attack. Haymaker, 1 energy can attack. Like Rain Dance can get through this by powering stuff up. So I just think it gate kept a lot of the really cool cards in the format.
Yeah, and like as we kind of went through, like all of base set is kind of broken in a sense, right? Like when we look back on it, and a lot of games do start out this way. If any of you have played Lorcana and you played the first chapter, I know you guys probably have not, but maybe the listeners have. The first chapter is extremely jank, and it feels like it takes these games a little bit of time to kind of get up to speed with how the game's going to interact with each other and stuff, and that makes sense. Like it's tough to make a whole game by itself. So like the big miss for Pokemon, I think on the surface, at least to me, is the absence of supporters. So you had these like crazy combos that you could just pull off, and a lot of the time you're drawing a kajillion cards and whatever, right? But the game evolved over time, and that's why I think like it was important for us to kind of space out this list of all the degen cards, because we could have done an entire list based off of base to Neo.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, cool. Next up, let's move on to... I'm actually kind of surprised we didn't end up getting this guy or the card on the list. We have Mewtwo EX from Next Destinies. I think when you think about power creep in the Pokemon trading card game, I think this card is like the poster child of power creep. It just felt like almost overnight the game like completely changed. We went from all these like single prize Pokemon and decks to basically our format like accelerated like crazy. Like it was just Mewtwo's going back and forth against each other. It was like if you didn't play Mewtwo yourself, you were at a big disadvantage. So, Curtis, I think this card was kind of like in your prime years of playing Pokemon. So, what can you tell our listeners about Mewtwo and how it kind of like changed the game? Probably for the worse.
Yeah. It's such an interesting card because I think like if you look at it in a vacuum, like present day, it probably doesn't look very good. It looks kind of underwhelming to most people. But like Ciaran just alluded to, it like totally changed HP caps, damage output just being totally limitless so that like you couldn't really wall it at any point in the game. It's like counter to itself was itself. And I think like on a multitude of different levels, like it really, like when I was making my list personally, just because I feel like upon the release of that card, it just changed everything. Like the format completely narrowed. Like you had to play a deck that played Mewtwo because you needed to beat Mewtwo. And if you were also trying to beat Mewtwo, kind of inherently you're like, if I'm already like putting Mewtwo in my deck, why don't I just go full blown Mewtwo deck? So it kind of just felt like Mewtwo was in every single deck. I remember there was like Ontario provincials, like me and my testing group. We like couldn't even source enough like Mewtwo, so like some of us just had to play a Durant deck just because we didn't have Mewtwo's necessary to play it, because it was like a $70, like $80 card, which was like insanely high back then. And I think on like a multitude of levels, like how oppressive it was, how narrow it made the format, the fact that it was like a built-in counter to itself. I almost wonder like what the Pokemon world would have looked like if they just produced another psychic Pokemon that like was an answer to it without needing a full deck. I think that would have been pretty interesting, but just like by itself, it was literally in everything.
Yeah. I think like imagine like kind of like to allude like you know how there's like Meteor to like counter Iron Hands and Snorlax, like if they printed something like that, or just like a one prizer. I think there's a couple things wrong with Mewtwo. Like you mentioned one of the big ones, it was weak to itself, so the game would just evolve really fast. It's like knocking Mewtwo back and forth. I think the other thing was like its attack was colorless. So it became a little too splashable. Like every deck could use it, and it existed at a time where double colorless existed, so you could use one energy on it as well. I think if the card needed like a psychic and a colorless to attack, I actually think it would be like decently balanced. But I just think the problem with it was like, yeah, one, like you said, the unlimited damage cap, but the fact that it was weak to itself just made it so games would go so quickly and you would just take turns knocking each other out back and forth. So that kind of takes away from, like you were saying, like earlier in our criteria, like the skill of it. It was literally just like who can maintain Mewtwo's more. And it's really funny you mentioned like the buying Mewtwo's, because like I remember some people would only have 2 in their deck because they couldn't afford it. And the first tournaments, people weren't sure how many Mewtwo you should play. And afterwards, it's like, oh no, you need to play as many as you can because otherwise you'll run out first before your opponent. And it was like so funny.
Yeah. I think the thing with Mewtwo, and Mewtwo wasn't on my list, full disclaimer. And like this might come from a place of nostalgia. And I know Pokemon players tend to do this a lot. But I didn't find it incredibly... It was game-altering, completely game-altering, but I didn't find it completely degenerate. I think the thing with Mewtwo is it came at a time where there was a solid 4-year span where we hadn't had multiple prizes, aside from legend cards and expert belt, right? So I think at the time when it dropped, I actually think it was received more warmly than it would be if it was now or whatever, because there's been 4 years where we hadn't had 2 prizes in the format. And I think there were other things involved in the format that made it worse than what it could have been in other formats. You had electric, you had things like that kind of accelerated energies to it, and you also had this like Gardevoir thing. That, do you guys remember that? The Gardevoir
that wasn't good.
It wasn't good. It wasn't good. But what I'm saying is you would have used that had there been a psychic requirement anyway. So I think the card still would have been good because you had that Gardevoir in format to kind of accelerate it. Mind you, is the card badly designed? Absolutely. I think absolutely is badly designed. But I don't think it's as bad as a top 10 list for me.
I think I have to disagree. No, I feel like back then there was a lot of disdain for that card because I feel like we went from a format like universally like loved by people back then, and then the game just like shifted so quickly. And I think we talk about cost nowadays, but I think I remember cost being a big thing back then too.
But I mean, Darkrai is just as big as a culprit.
Yeah, but the card like that card is broken, but like I don't know if it was like as bad as like when Mewtwo came out, like the shift. Like
to me, like in terms of how good they were, they're on very similar tiers.
No, they are.
So to me, like it doesn't push one over the other.
Yeah, I think like Darkrai helped. Like it wasn't just Darkrai, and Darkrai wasn't a counter to Darkrai, because Darkrai was in like the Twin Clan deck. Plug for the podcast. And like it was like you splash it with like Keldeos. Like it found like the Hydreigon deck. Like it felt like Darkrai, maybe like through its longevity, was probably like even a better, more powerful card than Mewtwo. But I felt like Mewtwo, upon its release, just like narrowed everything. Like,
yeah, it was definitely more impressive.
Was viable. Yeah, like whatever you thought was viable is no longer viable. If you can't beat Mewtwo, you ditch that deck. I felt like with Darkrai, you still had some wiggle room.
Yeah, you drag
but
in.
with Mewtwo, yeah, and I also feel like the other big thing is that like Ciaran was saying, the game changed so fast because we went from like Luxray, like abilities to like pull things up to catcher and like Pokemon catcher, like on like punishable like gust effects with Mewtwo. So it just felt like even if you wanted to play a stage 2 deck, you really just couldn't. Like it was, for me anyways, it was just bad all around. I think it just
that was the thing we mentioned too.
Format.
Yeah, that was the thing we mentioned too. Like how much of a card's distaste is like it itself versus the format it's in and the support it has, right? Like we'd mentioned this a lot in our criteria. I think Mewtwo is like, we talked about this as well, like just print one psychic Pokemon, man. Just one. Like you can counter it so easily, and I think that's what I mean. Like I think the card was absolutely oppressive, but I think it could have been fixed. Like you just print one good psychic Pokemon, the card's fixed.
I think
like, it's nothing that insane.
The other thing too, like Curtis was saying with the stage 2s, like it was really weird too, the shift they made back then, because like if you ever go back and play like EX era, for example, like a non-EX stage 2 is about the power level of like an EX or even a stage 1 EX. But once we shifted to like the Mewtwo EX era, like the stage 2s just sucked. Like they weren't as good as the basic EXs. So it's like, what's the point in like playing them? So
and still to this day, it's the same thing. Like, it hasn't really changed.
So
yeah,
cool.
That's probably like if you were to like look at a graph, that's when like everything shifted. Was like upon the release of that Mewtwo, because it kind of felt like maybe the philosophy with Pokemon changed from like, I don't want to say like full blown strategy, but it definitely felt like it turned more into like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, where it's like we both just set up like really big Pokemon that are basic and we're going to take turns swinging at each other. But I feel like Mewtwo kind of represented the worst of that because it just kind of felt like it was the answer to itself. So you were just like, almost like every game in that format just devolved into Mewtwo Wars.
Yeah, if you guys want to go watch that, go on like the Top Cuts YouTube channel. They have tons of videos from that era if you're curious like what it's like. But yeah, we spent a lot of time on Mewtwo there because I think it is one of the most iconic cards I think of all time, and really is like something you got to talk about when we talk about the history of the game. So okay, our last honorable mention, we have Marshadow, the one with the Let Loose ability. This card is probably one of my least favorite cards of all time. And the reason I think it's poor game design was the way it was utilized was if you went first, you would just play this card and just hope your opponent bricks. So it was literally a card that was kind of like a 25% chance, like, win the game on the spot. And if you're the one getting let loose, it's like, well, like, this is just like a casino that, like, I just lose a game out of my control because I went second. And, like, the other thing was, like, there was cards back then, like Jirachi, where if you were the one playing let loose, like, you could save it and, like, draw cards yourself. And since you went first, you got time to set up your strategy before you used it. So I think this is just poor game design. So it takes skill out of it. And it's just pure degeneracy and, like, randomness. So, Aneil, you played during this era too. What are your thoughts on like Let Loose?
I didn't like it either. I'll be honest. Wasn't a huge fan. Yeah, I think the card. Well, so the card in its lifespan, it was kind of whatever at first. If I remember correctly, like Marshadow wasn't really a thing for a long time, and then it eventually like kind of peeked its head out as this good like counter card. It was at one point like kind of played like a Shaman EX where people would just want a searchable like hand refresh. And then it just deteriorated into whatever degen state it was at by the end of its lifespan. So I think the worst part was like Marshadow combined with Chimecho, combined with like other disruption cards was the issue. Your point of it being like 25% that your opponent's just going to lose is absolutely correct. Like there wasn't a lot of supporters in that format. There wasn't a lot of stability. So I think the card would have been better off not printed for sure. But I think like the fact that Giratina exists in the Platinum set with Let Loose, that ability as well, and the fact that Marshadow wasn't really like huge in its first little while of existence says enough to me that it should just be an honorable mention, probably not a top 10. But absolutely, yeah, that card would have been better off not printed.
Yeah. Kurt, did you play when Let Loose was a thing or no?
Not really, but I think like anytime you print like an effect like this, something that like turn one you could search for, or something that you can bench that effectively like completely like debilitates your opponent from playing the game, just like doesn't sound good. And I think the other thing that's like probably worth mentioning is you can also use it as a disruption tool, but you could also use it to extend your combos. So like if you were like a little bit further off from what you needed, like let's say you needed an energy or you needed a supporter, Marshadow was still like you're out in the deck. So it wasn't even seen as like just a disruptive tool. And so I think kind of like within that, like it probably sounds like good game design because it kind of fits a lot of facets, but anytime you have a card that ends up becoming like a descriptive term for like why you lost the game, like I got let loose and I couldn't draw out of it, like that should like probably put it in infamy. So I think it's definitely worth a mention.
Yeah, I mean for people who've played modern Pokemon, if you remember like me or like Arceus playing Judge on you turn 2 or whatever, and you're like, oh, I really hope I draw out of it. Like imagine like that on an ability that like you can do turn 1 going first.
And it also changed things too, because like in modern Pokemon now, you're taught to never bench Pokemon if you're going second, right? Like you never bench them. Back then, hey man, you got no choice. You might get Marshadow turn 1. You better bench your Pokemon. Also, Curtis, suck it. Ernie Clement just hit a 3-run homer on your hometown San Francisco Giants. So I just wanted to let you know. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know.
Live sports updates.
Yeah, live sports update. It's 3-1 now. You say Kikuchi's throwing a gem. I know you probably don't care about baseball, but you live in San Fran. We live in Toronto, so I'm going to take my shot so I can get him.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get on you.
I'll hold it down.
I feel like Curtis is more of a Blue Jays fan than a Giants fan.
I know, that's why I bring it up.
Baseball like that one sport, man, that I just can't.
Are you going to go watch DeRozan this year? You're close by.
Maybe, actually. Yeah, I might take that up. That like whole like downtown Sacramento area is like really kind of like popped off lately. Probably underrated to everything else we're going to talk about, but that like little pocket of California, it's coming up. I don't think they're like a meme anymore. It's like,
don't worry, I know you're super invested, so if there's another run in the game, I'll be sure to let you know.
But yeah, please do. I need live updates right now.
I got you, dog.
Yeah. All right, before we move on from Marshadow, another reason I hate this card is like when I went in of 2018 Worlds Day 1, it was Game 3, and I literally lost because I got let loose, and I'm like,
he was brewing this while we were talking about baseball.
I know, I was just like,
he was brewing
I was going to bring it up, and then you brought up baseball, and I'm like, all right, let's get us back on topic. But yeah, that's another reason I hate this card.
Picking this one up.
And Neil, real quick, how heavy do you think Marshadow is?
How heavy do I think Marshadow is? Yo, all right, let me think.
Yo, he's like a ghost that like goes through the ground, I think. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, but yo, I've been to hella Bath and Body Works in my life, okay? And I've held a lot of candles. 1 wick, 3 wick, anything. And I'm going to say this boy looks like a solid like 21.6 pounds.
I would say like 5, Curtis.
Wow, you know why I asked? It's because like I have the card pulled up just to like remind myself of like how deep in this card was. I don't know if y'all are going to believe this. And yeah, obviously like Pokemon stuff is like kind of funky with some of this stuff. Marshadow is 48.9 pounds.
Oh wow,
bro.
Good for Marshadow.
Is he bulky?
2 of my sons. He's bulky.
That's gonna be my weight gain after all the beers I had tonight.
Yeah, gotta let loose right now.
I gotta let loose. 48 pounds. Jesus, this boy's thick. All right, cool. The more you know.
Nice. I feel like for every card now, Curtis is like gonna have us on our toes, like what the weight is.
I hope so.
I'm gonna get live baseball updates. I'm gonna start quizzing.
Yeah, clearly we need to work on this weight thing. We're both like double.
Yeah,
off
I was way
right now,
off.
so, yeah.
Okay, true. Well, that's our honorable mention, so I think we can move on to the top 10 now. I think our 10th place card is probably another infamous card that I think a lot of people clicking on the video or like listening to the episode are expecting on it. So we have Shaman EX. I mean, I think this card just in its prime was just like insane. I think almost every single deck played this. It's almost like playing a supporter as like an ability. We would see decks literally like sometimes play like 3 Shamans in one turn. Like it just allowed you to like cycle through your whole deck really, really quickly. And it just like enabled some like degenerate aggressive combos. Like I think Night March would not have been as good of a deck if it didn't have Shaman to basically let it like get all the Night Marchers turn 1. We saw like Seismitoad EX take advantage of this to draw all its like disruption cards really quickly. Make sure they're always 1, getting off a Quaking Punch, but 2, making sure they get their hammers, getting their Zerozix, Team Flare Guns, things like that. So I just think Shaman really sped up the game a lot. And it also had like an attack to put itself back in his hand, which I guess could be good game design, but like it also like could lead to some degeneracy as well. So I don't know, I just think Shaman as a whole just really accelerated the game. So that's why I think it's here at the back half of our list. Curtis, I know you played a lot with Shaman. So what are your thoughts on the card?
Yeah. It's a funny one, right? Because I think like I think that was like probably the hardest thing, like collectively, like when we were making the list, is like how do you like divorce card from format or divorce card from like everything else that exists with it? Because like obviously like that should contribute to like why you've designed a card or like the philosophy behind why like a card exists in the first place. And Pokemon does this a lot where they'll release like a set and then there'll be like a pre-baked like ready-made archetype ready to go. So like Shaman came out with like the Skyfield that like let you bench 8 things, the Mega Rayquaza. Like it was a very like accessible, like digestible deck like you could see in front of you like as you bought this set. But I think the problem was like Shaman just like enabled everything else to become incredibly broken. Another card that's going to make the list that I'm not going to spoil really helped like just like create a toxic environment due to Shaman. So what I would say is that I think like Shaman's maybe a byproduct of all the other toxic cards that existed. But I think like in any format, if you give a card that kind of ability, it's just going to be broken. Like we've seen kind of the children spawn of it with like the Dene, with Crobat, even like predecessors like Uxie. You've seen kind of the longevity of like how powerful these cards are, but it kind of like maybe within Pokemon's longevity, I feel like Shaman's probably the most broken out of like all the ones we've mentioned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think like you hit the nail on the head. It's more so like the product of when it came out. Like I think like when we rank these cards, we kind of rank them relative to like the formats they were in the rule set. I think one thing about the X and Y era especially is there was a lot of really toxic supporter cards. And normally if you play a supporter card that doesn't draw cards, like that's supposed to be the trade-off, right? If you play something like a supporter that gets rid of energy or like discards cards from your opponent, or you play like Boss, for example, like you're supposed to the drawback be like you're not drawing cards, you're not setting up your board. But Shaman kind of like just like makes that not an issue because you can just keep drawing and setting up while playing these like toxic type of cards. So I do think like the whole game kind of shifted around Shaman. I think when we saw like the next versions of it come out, like Crobat V, for example, literally said you can only use it like once, like one, whatever it's ability, like Dark Asset or something like per turn. Because I think they realized like having the ability to draw through your whole deck is a little too good, especially when there's like broken combos that you can pull off with it. So
yeah. I mean, you want to talk about times where there was like a poster child of the game changing? I think that's a huge benchmark. I think Roaring Skies as a set was a huge benchmark of like the game changing entirely. And at least in my perspective, it wasn't in a positive way. Like, you have that plus Skyfield plus Mega Ray coming out in the same set. You think about the hype that you get nowadays when even a card like Dragapult comes out and everyone's going ballistic. Imagine that came out today. Like, just absolutely warped the format. There's a reason why setup hasn't been reintroduced, I think. Like, at least not in that capacity, as Ciaran alluded to. Like, it entirely changes the way the game is played. The card I think I would relate it to most is actually Genesect in a sense. Like, Genesect is obviously archetype restricted, but Genesect was very, very similar in that sense, but Genesect was balanced in the sense that it didn't have a multitude of attackers to go with it. Now, you imagine if Genesect was splashable and everything, and you have Shaman. And so, like, that was big, and then Sky Return also being a thing on the card, being able to bring it back into your hand is huge. I think there was ways to get it off the board. Obviously, it had a very trivial amount of HP in the sense that, like, it was very low. So a lot of decks would get punished for playing it, which was good, but it still wasn't enough to balance the card out. So I think it has a very worthy place at 10th on our list.
I think the last thing I'll say too is, like Curtis said too, like the Skyfield Stadium came with it. So like a lot of decks would play Skyfield and Shaman, and then like your opponent's deck like had their own stadium they normally had to play. So when they'd play their own stadium, you could just discard all your Shamans and like get the liabilities off your board pretty easily. Which I thought was, again, like, I mean, I don't know if that's good or bad game design necessarily, but that was just another reason why the card was so good.
Well, I think they also doubled down. It got worse when they released Hoopa EX. Sorry, not to open this back up. But Hoopa EX did not help.
Yeah, just pull 3 out of your deck.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like, within, like, maybe, like, I think, like, kind of the predecessor in, like, Yuxi and, like, how powerful that card was back in, like, 2010, 2009. I don't think it, like, necessarily saw that level of power because you needed to, like, number one, like, back then there wasn't, like, really raw draw. It was kind of like you had, like, your search level supporters, but, like, Shaman also coincided with, like, the onset of, like, Ultra Ball becoming, like, universal draw. So it was like, now you had a built-in engine where you were already playing 4 Ultra Ball. You're probably playing, like, 3 to 4 Shamans in almost everything. So it kind of just felt like your decks were already just getting pre-baked. Like, no matter what you were playing, it was almost like, I don't think it's, like, ever fun in a card game where, like, decks start becoming, like, universal. Every deck plays the exact same 12 supporters. You have your Reverse Seekers, you have your exact same Ball Search, your same support Pokemon, and then it was just, you just interchange your attackers a little bit. I think that's just kind of, like, poor design in a nutshell.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's like you said, like, almost everything just had that same, like, framework, which is, like, yeah, just, like, lame. Okay, cool. I think we can move on to number 9 here. So this is a more recent card. I think almost all of our listeners will know this card. We have the Battle VIP Pass. So I think most people hate this card, but Aneil, why don't you explain why VIP Pass is on the list?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to see why it's on the list. It's a very, very luck-based card that we don't like. You have to kind of start it or start a way to find it on your first turn. So that was a big issue with it. But I think the bigger issue was the benefit that it provided. There are a lot of cards in history that kind of have a similar effect. Like, you can only play this on your first turn or whatever. Like, it provides some sort of effect, but none of them, or at least very few of them, were as powerful as Battle VIP Pass and opened such a wide void between your and your opponent's setup if you had it and they did not. So the main issue behind this card, at least in my eyes, is that, like, if I'm starting with it and then Curtis is not starting with it, I'm immediately at like a 30% advantage in this game. So that card was promptly replaced with Buddy Buddy Poffin. God bless Buddy Buddy Poffin, saved us. Love that card.
Card of the year?
And yeah, card of the year, genuinely. Shift Gear Awards 2025. So yeah, Buddy Buddy Poffin kind of saved it, and it goes to show, like, there was a point in time, like, now that you look back on it, you're like, I cannot believe Battle VIP Pass was in format, and we all had to deal with this for as long as we did.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just like, it's like if you don't start with the card, like, your setup is just so much farther behind, and like when you go first, like, you can't really draw cards or play supporters. So like, even if you play 4 copies, the odds of like opening it in your hand is like around like 50-50. And like the games where you get it naturally, the games you don't are just like so different. So I just think it's bad to like make setup, which is like a core part of like every deck, just like kind of gate kept like that, or like make it so high variance. And almost every deck had to play VIP Pass. There weren't many decks that could get away without playing it. So, Curtis, I don't know if you have anything to add, but I just think that's basically why that card was so poorly designed.
Yeah, I guess, because like I'm not like an active player anymore, I haven't like lived through kind of the trauma of Battle VIP Pass. So I probably don't have anything else like additional to add to like what you guys have mentioned. But I think it does speak volumes when like every deck has to play the same card, but like it isn't a card that like you can inherently search on your first turn. So like if you're lucky enough to like play it and your opponent isn't, then I kind of feel like that speaks to volumes on like maybe a card that like provides like too much toxicity.
Yeah.
Like in a card game.
Yeah, it's basically just like moving, like Neil said, like the win percent by like a significant amount, just by if you have this card or not. So yeah, VIP Pass I think universally disliked, honestly.
Yeah. The last thing I just want to add is like in general, like when we think about this list and this like degen list, like a lot of it comes to, okay, is this card increasing RNG of the game? I think that's a big factor too, right? Like they're like you think about Marshadow. We're big proponents, the three of us, of like we like the game to be skill based. We like the game to be skill intensive, right? Like that's kind of the way we look at it. But there are a lot of these cards that kind of remove that and add more entropy to the game. And I think that's also like an underlying pretense of why we picked some of the cards we did. And our list may be completely different than other people's lists who don't have the same philosophy as us. So I just wanted to pretense that, kind of throw that out there. That's kind of how we thought about this. And the RNG of the game is obviously going to be there. It's just some cards accentuate it more than others.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
Yeah, I think also it's probably a good time to mention that like when we were doing this, like we just like brainstormed cards and we created a list of like 30 plus cards. So, like obviously because this is like a top X list, this doesn't mean that if there's a card you really hated or a card that provided a toxic experience for you, it was like definitely on our brainstorm whiteboard.
Yeah, well, at the end maybe we'll go through this like rapid fire some other ones we thought about.
Yeah.
Okay, but one we did put on the list at number 8, we got the Forest of Giant Plants. So this one's interesting, I think, because like in a vacuum, like this card isn't broken. It's the Pokemon that it enables is broken. And I do want to say like the other thing is this existed at a time where the rules allowed you to play supporters turn 1, and it existed with Shaman. So it was very easy to like evolve to whatever you wanted in your grass deck. And the main card that really abused this was the Vileplume from Ancient Origins. And the Vileplume's effect was both players can't play item cards. So kind of how we talked about like earlier, like Marshadow, you could like pull off all your stuff and then like just brick your opponent. Like you could basically just like set up your side of the board, evolve to a Vileplume, and then your opponent just is item locked the entire game pretty much without a way to get out of it. So that feels really bad when you're the player going second and you're like, well, I don't even get a chance to play the game sometimes. You just get bricked right away. So I just think this was like a card that enabled really, really unfun experiences. And there was another card that actually got banned when this came out, even though it debatably wasn't that broken, but it was an unfun experience. So like, Curtis, why don't you mention that card that got banned alongside its release of this card?
Yeah, I feel like this is the most interesting card as far as like how do you divorce it from like what existed with it. So effectively, like what Ciaran's talking about is a shift tree card where once you evolved it, you flip a coin. If heads, you could shuffle one of their Pokemon back into their deck, which I think seems like a pretty silly ability, but when you can evolve straight up because the basic and the stage 1 to shift tree were grass types, it kind of created an environment where you could just like rapid fire a deck with Shaman, you could play your supporters, you could get your Forest of Giant Plants, and effectively you created this like endless cycle of shift trees where eventually you could just like deck your opponent, you could bench your opponent. And of course, any card that exists where your opponent doesn't even get a chance to play could probably make for a fun solitaire deck, but doesn't make for a fun playing experience. But yeah, I think this card's like really interesting because I think like knowing the designers released it at the exact same time they released Vileplume speaks to like maybe the problems and why we have such a bad taste in our mouth, because the Vileplume effectively shut off item cards. So I think like you knowing you're designing a card purely on the sentiments that you're creating like a rapid fire deck that like locks your opponent from even playing. I don't know, that seems kind of icky to me. But then I also think that like if anybody listening is like, well, why not like Broken Time Space or why not any other similar effects that occurred? I felt like any time that a card like this has ever been printed, it was actually done to like level the playing field so that slower decks could keep up with the pace of like faster like aggression decks. So I felt like this was kind of a shift in like maybe not even doing that. It kind of felt like it teetered the balance like completely in the opposite way. We've seen it banned and expanded. We've seen it just like create really, really toxic combos. I just don't think it was like a really well thought out card. No offense to anybody that designed it.
I don't think those people are listening, but if they were, that'd be pretty sick. Maybe this will make it to the top ranks. I have 3 things to add, and all 3 of them are not related to anything we're talking about. 1, I wanted to show off that my hat is reversible. That's 1.
Nice.
2, the Giants scored a home run, so it's 3-2. And 3, and the most important thing, this is the most Californian thing I've ever seen. When I just saw Curtis take off his AirPods Max to reveal his AirPod Pros in his ear. Apple, designed in California, has their number 1 poster boy on with us. And I don't even know how the hell he did that. How did you get one to work and not the other? Like, what's going on there? I need to just know.
I think a bigger conversation piece was like, as you were flipping your hat, like my headphones died. So I was like, all right, what kind of witchcraft is in the hat?
Oh,
like,
that's what it was.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Dude, I thought you had like overheads on top of the AirPod Pros.
Oh man, that would have been super Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
We'll have to check the recordings to see like what I did there, but I'm not going to reveal all my secrets.
That was some juju. But anyways, yes, sorry. About Forest of Giant Plants, what we're talking about. Yeah, like I didn't play much in that time. I'll preface that. Just like Curtis, I have some gaps in my knowledge. He's more modern. I'm more ancient, where I have gaps. But I do remember playing a couple tournaments, and I remember like reading the card for the first time, and I'm like, there's no way this should exist. It seems like it was just BTS, but more tailored towards one type, which is we've seen in history, like Pokemon kind of cater to one type and try to make that type really, really good. But I think there's a way to do it and a way not to do it. Like one example, I think is Irida, where Irida exists to buff up water types to make them more relevant in the meta, and it's great, it works, but it does it in a healthy way. I don't think Forest of Giant Plants was that.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. Do you guys think Forest would be like a fine, like if Vileplume Forest came out today, do you think it would be fine given the restrictions, like you can't play supporters turn 1, you can't really draw as many cards?
I don't know.
I
think there are very few
really
formats where it wouldn't be good.
I kind of just feel like item lock is just so powerful, like in the history of the game. And I feel like if it was something that you could enable turn 1 somehow, some way, that's like not good. Yeah, I kind of feel like that power level is just going to be strong at any point. Yeah. There has to be a broken combo. There has to be.
Yeah, there probably is. I just thought I was curious because, like, I just feel like I think like the rules back then, like Shaman, like just made it even more toxic. But like, I agree with you because, like, honestly, anything that enables you to pull off degen combos turn 1 is probably not good for the game.
I just think item lock in general would be really, really strong in the modern format.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Vileplume on its own is like I think Vileplume on its own is actually a fair card, like because it blocks both players, and like when there isn't Forest, like you have to actually like evolve to it, like Rare Candy or something. Like you have to dedicate, like build your deck around playing less items, so like your early game's normally weaker, or like your combos are weaker. So that part I think is cool, but yeah, I think the degeneracy lock right away, that isn't cool.
Like, imagine Charizard having to play double Charmeleon and a Pidgeotto. Like, it sounds crazy, man. I don't know.
Yeah. Item lock is definitely one of the most strong things we've ever seen.
Yeah, I think also, like, maybe something that's, like, also worth noting about this is the idea that, like, maybe if we were to put, like, our, like, designer, like, hats on and be like, hey, like why reverse it back is like why do that? And at the time there was like a trash Alanche Garbodor that like really heavily punished like people from like really accelerating with shamans and like really just like drawing through your whole decks because its damage ramped up based on like the trainer cards that would be in the discard pile. But I think the issue with like that and saying that there was counterplay was the idea that like you could enable this combo turn 1. And if you can enable a combo turn 1 and then completely block your opponent from ever using a trainer card, you might not even get to the Garbodor to punish that. So all around, it was just like really bad. And for anybody watching, especially when you watch like a TCG stream, they do like a historic, like they do like historic card game videos. And there's one specifically where somebody is like getting completely like whooped by like this like Vileplume Forest of Giant Plant deck, but his opponent wins because his opponent like drew through the whole deck and he just had like a boss's order equivalent at the time to bring up like the Vileplume, and his opponent just like had no outs because they drew through their deck. It's like it's a pretty funny watch if you can like somehow find a way to link it.
I think the clip, it's Fred Hoban and the other guy, his name is Paul something. I can't remember the guy's last name. But yeah, it's like they do it in the stream sometimes. I've seen that one too.
That's hilarious. I want to point out another Californian thing Curtis just did. So his boy Kendrick released that music video, lots of hidden messages, and there will be a Shift Gear review of the Not Like Us music video at some point. But what I'd like to point out is he made a really interesting play on words when he said if we put our designer hats on, because you know what our group chat's called? No cap. No cap. And so we can't talk about the meaning of no cap on live, but that was a very interesting hidden message there, Mr. Curtis Lamar. I'm catching on to you. All right, I'm catching on to you.
I better get the invite for the Not Like Us video breakdown. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, we can stream it live. Bring in
Yeah,
I have a long invite list for that one. There's a lot of individuals I need input from. You're one of them.
Nice.
Here I am, like, asking my wife to get time away from the kids, because I'm, like, talking to you guys about Pokemon and history and stuff like that. Meanwhile, she's going to tune in, watching me talk about, like, Drake and Kendrick and stuff, and be like, all right, you're done with this.
There's certain things that are more important than Pokemon, my friend.
Yeah, come upstairs and change some diapers. You're done with this.
Nice.
Metro, shut up and make some drums.
Okay.
All right, back to the video.
All right, we're going back in time a little bit more from when Forest came out. We're going number 7. We have the Hypnotoxic Laser. I think this is probably one of the most famous item cards of all time. It poisons your opponent's active, but it had the second effect where you flip a coin. If heads, they're asleep. So I just think, like, if you've ever played with this card, you have so many memories where it's like your opponent plays it, you're like, okay, hopefully they get tails, they get heads, and then you're just like, okay, well, if I don't get heads, like, I just literally, like, lose because I can't play the turn. And there existed at a time with, like, Seismitoad EX, which, like, item locked, so you couldn't even play cards like Switch. But yeah, I just think this card was super degenerate. Like, Curtis, I think you played probably the most with this card. I think you have a strong hatred for this one, so I'll let you take it away why this is on the list.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like a lot of, like, what we're talking about, like, teeters on, like, actually, like, healthy design for, like, a format, or, like, maybe what the intended use was. So I kind of feel like the first effect of the item card, like, just putting your opponent's Pokemon, like, to be poisoned, is actually not the worst, because, like, you use it as a damage modifier. It released, like, it coincided with the stadium that changed poison's damage from 10 to 30. So I think, like, all around, that was fine. It was the sleep effect, like, that secondary effect that, like, really created, I'm going to go back in my Curtis Lamar bag here, but, like, it really created for a toxic environment with this card. Because, like,
very good.
Yeah, you caught that one?
Yeah, I like that one. I thought, Kendrick Lyon, low-key sounds better, though.
Yeah, Kendrick Lyon, yeah.
Kendrick Lyon sounds better.
Yeah, and I guess, like, all around, like, one of the criteria we had when making this list was, like, does it, like, reduce the skill gap between, like, players? And I can't tell you the amount of times, like, I've lost games because of the 25% chance, like, you fall asleep on, like, the returning turn. Because, like, back then, like, you weren't really accounting for, like, heavy switch options just for, like, a 25%, like, variable. So, like, if it happened to you, you kind of just got punished for it. And I guess, like, the counter argument was there was a card called Keldeo, that, effectively just, like, went from the bench to the active, and there was Floatstone. There was, like, some counterplay, but combined with things like Seismitoad, combined with, like, cards like, Junk Hunt Sableye that could keep reusing cards like this. I think, like, all around, like, even if you, like, don't, like, divorce this card from the format and you just, like, leave it as an isolated card, it's just bad. I think the sleep effect is really what ruined it. And, in my opinion, it, like, really, really closed that skill gap.
Yeah. I think another thing with the card is, like, you could attack going first back in the day. So, like, if you went first, you know, like, laser, Burbank, attack, you could do, like, 90 damage to whatever they started with. And it's just like, well, if they don't get that out of the active or heal it right away, like, you're just going to give up 2 prizes right away. Which really sucked.
Yeah, I think there is a game. I'm, like, definitely not going to be able to remember who was playing, and maybe whoever was playing, you can chime in the comments. But somebody started Execute that had 30 HP.
That's what I was going to
say.
say. Yeah.
Like, Burbank lasered it, and like their opponent, like, flung their cards on the table.
It was Gustavo Wada, bro.
Oh, it was? Yeah. Oh, wow.
Top 10 player in Shift Gear video.
Yeah, okay, damn. All right, yeah. That's a deep reference. But yeah, it's kind of like one of those. We were just like, dang, that's, like, really bad for the game.
My thing with laser is I actually enjoyed the damage buff it provided. I thought the combo for the damage buff was good. There's a lot of cards that use that damage buff. So like off the top of my head, I think about like Darkrai with Dark Claw. You do that for 140, and then you snipe 30, and then you clean up both those 170s the next turn. Another one that was huge was with Ciaran with Plasma. So you'd use the 3 Deoxys, get to 150, laser 180. So it enabled the format to be kind of, because it was a very two-shot kind of heavy format outside of a couple cards that hit for weakness. So I think it enabled a lot of things to kind of be a bit more dynamic within the format itself. But I agree that the sleep flip just felt unnecessary. Like, it's just like, if you just didn't do this would be sick. Yeah. Or maybe flip 2 coins if both are heads. Seriously, like, just do something, because this is like, I don't know. I didn't like the whole I have a 25% chance kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
I think they just liked calling the card Hypnotoxic Laser. So like, all right, we have to put sleep on it, so we can call it Hypnotoxic. Because the name is kind of cool.
Put like a hypno on it, just like shine a laser and like some penalty taker's eyes, like they do in Copa America.
If anybody can Photoshop a hypno with just the laser part of that card, then we can present this back to Puka and the rest of the design team and see what they can. Because don't they have a like A-spec version of it coming out? That's,
it's so bad.
Significantly,
you're poisoned and burned.
Like, why wasn't this the intent, right? Because I feel like that would have been fine, or even literally anything else. Just that was not good.
Like I said, like just poison, good game design. Sleep Flip, one of the worst design of all time. And Aneil, you mentioning the Darkrai math, this like made me remind me like one of the worst feelings ever was that they would go Darkrai, Dark Claw, Verbank, Laser. You stay asleep and then you die going into their turn. That's like one of the worst feelings. If anyone
you
played
see it in my
that
background,
format,
actually, right behind me is my Darkrai deck framed
nice.
up. I don't know if you can see it, but it has lasers in it. Yeah, there you go. It's gonna go on the wall soon. It's got it. The Hypnotoxic Laser, classic card.
Cool.
That's dope. Did you just like bring that to a framer and we're like? No,
I did it myself.
I need this.
Yeah.
Oh, dope.
My girlfriend helped me. I needed some like artistic help with it. I have all my World 60s framed, so behind it are my other ones. So I'm just looking for a good place to frame them.
Nice. Yeah, that's dope. I'm gonna send you some decks, and
I got you.
Aneil's new side business, and you could probably make
I probably could. Like, they're actually quite difficult, but I've mastered it pretty well, and I know when Michaels puts the frames on sale now, so I'm first in line, dude. If I don't get 150 off, your boy's there.
That's how you know you're growing up, eh?
Yeah, man. The next thing I'm doing, I don't know if you can see it. Here you go. I have all these. Frame all of these.
Wow.
And make like a giant. I don't know. Make a giant nerd wall in my basement or something.
Nice.
Good. Because my basement's hilarious. It's a bunch of like sports memorabilia because that's what everyone knows me as. But then like my friends from Pokemon, they know me as like huge nerds. So we're gonna just put them both together and see what we can create.
I do love how like Pokemon has become cool again. Like my apartment, like if you ever come to it, it's a lot of like Pokemon stuff that's like tasteful. Like I have Pokemon pillows behind me, if you can see, but like it's kind of hard to tell if you don't like Pokemon. I have like Pokemon like salt shakers and stuff. It's part of the aesthetic.
They're giving you a Pokemon beach ball this year.
I saw that. I'm hyped, bro. That's gonna be sick for some pool parties. So
I'm ready, bro.
Yeah. So that'll be dope.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. I didn't even know that they were doing Pokemon Center slots today. I didn't sign up, but I saw that like it didn't even work for anybody. So I can probably go get one.
Did you get a slot?
No, I didn't. I tried, and then like it didn't work, and I'm like, I don't care that much. Like.
I have 4 slots. I'll get you in.
Okay, that's what I assumed. Someone would have a slot, so thanks, dog.
I got you.
Snag me one.
Yeah, I got you. All right, back to what we're here for.
Okay, number 6. We're going way back in time. We got Erica's Jigglypuff. I think people are probably going to be surprised to hear Jigglypuff is on the list. But Curtis, I think you're the resident expert on Erica's Jigglypuff, so tell the listeners why this card is so bad.
Yeah, I mean, like, this isn't something, like, I personally played through. Like, I wasn't playing back then, but kind of, like, living through old formats from, like, those that have. This is, like, this will, like, probably top, like, most of the lists. Obviously, with, like, HP ceilings being far lower back in the day, Erica's Jigglypuff effectively for, like, a double colorless energy hit for 40. It was actually probably one of the rare attacks that did 40 minus, but probably wasn't applicable for what we're about to talk about. So for 1 energy, doing 40 in a format with like item finders and plus powers, you could like quickly ramp up to like hit 1-hit kills on virtually anything that probably wasn't a Chansey or Kangaskhan. So I just kind of felt like anytime you create a card that like effectively like oppresses your opponent from like ever playing the game or just creates like a really donk heavy like inducive format just isn't good. but I think this is one of the few cards on our list we also have to marry with a couple of other cards that kind of spoiling the movie here we're going to talk about later. But effectively, like with like this card and its power level, like for when it existed, was like just simply way, way, way too strong. And then you marry that with some of the other cards that like also existed. And I think his card goes from just being like toxic to hypnotoxic, if you also caught that one too.
It never ends with this boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep on your toes, Aneil.
Yeah, I'm ready, bro.
Yeah, I think when we were like coming up with this list, Curtis, you sent us like the excerpt from like Jason Krasinski's blog. And, like I have it pulled open. I'm not gonna read all of it, but I'll read some for the viewers. So he said, in all of the years the Pokemon TCG has existed, no single card has ruined more players' day than Erica's Jigglypuff hitting for 40 damage with a double colorless. Jigglypuff could be loaded with plus powers to score a first turn knockout on any basic with 80 HP or less. He recalls playing tournaments back in 2000 at a store he frequented, and the entire mood of the event changed. At the start of each round, you could almost feel players' uneasiness when they sat behind a single basic Pokemon, wondering if they'd even get to play a turn. So yeah, basically it was like if you started with one Pokemon and you went second, you're like, oh, there's a very good chance I'm just getting donked right now. And obviously like games where you get donked, I think everyone thinks are just like not fun to play. So I think honestly, like if this card said you can't use this attack if you go first, it would probably still be strong, but I think that would probably be like balanced and again, like teetering on good game design. But yeah, just the fact that this could end games on the spot just like wasn't really cool.
Lessons were learned, man. That era, lessons were learned. That is for sure.
Cool. Any other thoughts? Or are we good to move on to the top 5?
No, we're good.
Okay, so top
five,
five we have these cards had the same effect, so we put them together, but I think one is worse than the other. So we have Pokemon Catcher, pre-nerf, and Gust of Wind. But I think we all agree that Pokemon Catcher was the main poorly designed card. So for anyone who plays modern Pokemon, you know Pokemon Catchers, you flip a coin of heads, you get to switch your opponent's active. When it came out, it just switched your opponent's active without flipping. So it's basically Boss's orders like on an item card. So I think everyone knows how strong Boss is, or just Unconditional Gust is as a whole. But yeah, just having the ability to do it on an item was insane. Like nothing was safe on the bench. You couldn't really have many bench sitter Pokemon, like or support Pokemon, because they would just get brought up. It existed in a time with a lot of aggressive cards, like Curtis said earlier, like Mewtwo EX, to just pick everything off. And the card almost read like, get a prize guaranteed this turn. Like you couldn't put a wall on the active because it was so easy for you to play catcher. It existed at a time with a card called Junk Arm, where it was like discard 2 cards, get an item from your discard. So like effectively, if you played 4 catcher and 4 Junk Arm, you had like 8 catchers in your deck. So yeah, I just think like Unconditional Gust is just way too strong. It really hurts setup decks because as you're trying to set up your guys, like attaching to them or evolve them up, they can just get brought up too easily, and it can get in combination with like draw supporters. I think earlier I made the case that, like Shaman's bad because you get to draw and play like cool supporter effects. Catcher, you can play like draw supporters plus get Gust. So yeah, I kind of went on a tangent there, but Curtis, what are your thoughts on Pokemon Catcher?
Yeah, I think like obviously Gust of Wind is probably like the iconic example, but I think like you kind of give it a pass because like as we've talked about like with previous like early cards, I think the game was still trying to figure itself out. Like Aneil talked about other card games, and if anybody's played Magic, obviously there's like the Power 9. So it's like cards when they're first release are just like super powerful because the game is like in its infancy, trying to figure out like what it's even going to be. And there wasn't really a card back then up until like I think Hitmonlee that like sniped or did damage to the bench. So like maybe the game like kind of in that like first stage thought that like Gust of Wind was supposed to replicate that level of effect. Obviously it's like super problematic and like overall like in a vacuum bad design. But I also think that like the example that's like probably worth highlighting is when Pokemon Catcher first came out with like Mewtwo with those ultra aggressive big basic Pokemon, because then it just really felt like a race game where it wasn't really about like your setup. It really wasn't about like, I don't want to necessarily like diminish skill, but it kind of just felt like your prize mapping was so figured out because of just the sheer amount of like how fast the game was. I just don't think it was like a well like timed card for like when it came out. And obviously people that are playing now with things like Counter Catcher or people that have played with things like POW Hand Extension, there's always been a drawback or some like cost at like playing an effect this powerful. So the fact that this is unconditional and you can play it whenever you want, I think it's just like, I don't even know if it's like bad design, but it's just like too strong of a design that like should exist in a card game like this maybe like where my thought is.
Yeah, and I have a few things I actually want to add to this. So there's some context with Catcher. I think that's important. So at the time that Catcher came out, there was not a consistent Gust in format. So Pokemon Reversal was the primary form of a Gust, which was a flip, which is what modern Pokemon Catcher is. And the game was different in the sense that there was a lot of moving parts, like Pokemon like Donphan had Exoskeleton, which made it a big Pokemon in the active. There are item lock cards like Vileplume. So Pokemon Catcher, when it came out, actually kind of buffed Vileplume in a sense because people were very reliant on Catcher. And when Vileplume was up, you could never Catcher and get rid of that Vileplume. So what was previously snipe Pokemon, or what was previously like Pokemon that were used to target benches because there was no Gust, turned more into Catchers. So in a sense, Catcher kind of buffed Vileplume. But when it came out in Emerging Powers, it came out with Tornadus and Thundurus, these 80 damage Pokemon, pretty simple, but they became like infinitely more powerful just because of this card. And then as the format evolved, as Mewtwo came out 2 sets later, and then Tornadus came out with Darkrai, a set after that, that's when you really started to see how this whole thing kind of came together. So for me, it was like a lesson in how Pokemon kind of designs these things. Like Pokemon Catcher on its release wasn't super crazy, but within 2 or 3 sets, you can see kind of like the new world they morphed revolving this card. So I think obviously it's very powerful. I think now we're used to it being behind a supporter, which is good. But at the time, it was basically unprecedented for about 10 years.
Yeah, I have an interesting question, you guys. So like when I was making this list, I consulted a good friend of the pod, Mike Fouché, and we were discussing, is Boss's Orders and Guzma, is that bad game design? Is Unconditional Gust bad game design? I'm curious what you guys think.
Aneil, you want to go first, and I'll offer my 2 cents. Whoops.
Yeah.
You guys hear me?
Yeah,
I think I'm going to cut out for a second.
You're good.
Oh.
I'm just trying to think like objectively. I don't think it is. I think there's enough search and enough draw in the format that you can reliably hit it when you need to. It's not super luck based. I have a beef with it in formats where I feel like you need it more consistently. So someone who misses a turn of boss is in more trouble. But I think now it's in a fine state, personally.
Yeah, I think it's almost one of those like questions that like depends heavily on like what exists around it. Like personally, I think Guzma was way too strong. Like your ability to switch, which is such a powerful effect in itself. Plus also like bring something off of the bench. That's too much power in like one Gust effect. And I would also say that like maybe it is to a certain degree, because I think like there's maybe never been a point in Pokemon where Gust effects have been legal, where they haven't maybe defined how like you play the game. So I don't know if like poor game design is how I'd word it, but it's almost like just been kind of part of the game. Mm-hmm. Like Luxray defined its format. Like non-SP decks played Luxray. Like it was that powerful. Then we've had things like, what was the one in the Inteleon decks lately that like you had to play 2? Cross Switcher? Yeah, Cross Switcher. Like you had to have 2, but that effectively like created your Gust effect. So I feel like at all times, like Gust effects are going to be as powerful as they can be. I just think it's like maybe not poor design. It's just something that like kind of exists within Pokemon now. Yeah, like it's existed almost like from POW hand extension, like maybe up until like 2008, maybe like the Gardevoir Gallade years. I don't know if there was anything within those years that could like really bring anything up. I would have to sit down and think about it, because back then it was like really heavily like warp point based, but it wasn't switching. I think come time for like Luxray, and then like it was just like since Luxray it's kind of existed.
Yeah, it feels
at all points.
It feels like the game is like balanced with boss in mind. Like it feels almost like a core. Like we were discussing this earlier, like about double color synergy. Where like we feel like the cards were designed with that specific card in mind. I personally like prefer formats without Unconditional Gust. I do think it's probably a little poor game design. I just think, like we were saying, like it just makes prize mapping way easier. Like the card basically reads like take a prize, and it just makes playing like bench sitting Pokemon a lot harder. I mean, you can say the flip side is like when you don't have Unconditional Gust, like bench sitting Pokemon become too good, or like tanks become too good because it's hard to get through them. But I think like a format where you don't have Unconditional Gust is like very different than like the format we'd have now. And I've played a couple of them. I think there should always be some sort of gust, but I do think you should have to work for it. Like either a counter catcher you have to be behind, like cross switcher, there used to be custom catcher, you have to get 2 of them. I think that's healthier than just being able to just go, okay, boss, like switch something up. But yeah, it's like hard to imagine the game without like boss's orders now, because we've had that effect basically like almost for like 10 years straight at this point. There's like a little gap where we had to like custom catcher, but other than that, we've had
you
it.
also kind of need it in current Pokemon just because of time rules. Like when you don't have Gust, games go on forever.
Yeah,
people just start running away. That's something that I was considering when I was answering.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah,
actually.
Also like it's maybe not even like the conditional part of it, but like how consistently can you play it without being punished? Because I think like with like the cards that like you have access to, like Bibarel, where you can still draw on your turn, or Pidgeot, where you can like effectively like rip it, or Corellia, where like there is no like, not even necessarily like the non-conditional part, but there is also that fact that like you can still play through your actions even without playing it or search it whenever you want. I kind of feel like that's when it can become a little problematic, because I think even in other formats, like even like where there were like formats with like Lysander and stuff like that, or even the Genesect where you attach the plasma energy, it didn't feel as like crippling. I think it's kind of like degenerated to the point where there are some formats where unconditional catcher effects are just like worse than other formats.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I thought that was an interesting question. I'm actually very curious. People in the comments, tell me what you guys think, if it's like good or not. What you guys think about unconditional gust as part of the game. Okay, cool. Curtis, this next card I think is the one you felt the most strongly about. I think Aneil and I also agreed that this is a very toxic card that should be on the list. We have the Sableye from Stormfront. So Curtis, tell everybody why this card is crazy.
Yeah. Oh man, just cut me off because I'm gonna ramble. If y'all give me an hour to talk about this, I'll take the full hour. No, but I think it's also a funny side note that this is the Sableye we picked. But there are probably like 4 or 5 Sableyes that like you could argue should be on this list. Sableye is just like that Pokemon, I guess, that the Pokemon Company are like, let's always give it the most degenerate. But I think this card's kind of like a tale of 2 halves, where like the first half of this card, its ability allows you to go first, and then its first attack effectively allows you to look into your deck, discard a supporter, and use it. That is like, if that was the card and you gave it some attack that did like 10 and confuse or 20 damage or something, this would probably make my list for like top 10 like favorite card designs. I think it would be that like cool, that innovative, like that ability to like pick the fact that you're going first, but then also give you like a built-in consistency engine with like no drawbacks. That to me is like a really, really cool, innovative card. But they gave it an attack that effectively said that like if the other Pokemon's HP is lower than Sableye, you effectively ramped its damage up to the point where you could kill it with like a special dark energy. And so that's kind of why I felt so strongly about this card. In fact, I had it like significantly higher because I kind of feel like one of the things that like we have to mention is how unfun a card is, but like how oppressive the card is. And this card single-handedly like gatekept the HP that basic Pokemon could have because of fear of being donked. So not only was the card so strong that it was like a really robust support Pokemon, but you also gave it this like really inherently broken attack that could like take advantage of donk people, with the added effect of like you making sure you went first. So it kind of felt like maybe the design in this card was almost designed to give you a donk engine, which doesn't sit right with me. But then you also combine the card with things like Expert Belt to ramp the HP up and the damage up, Crobat and Poke Turn to lower the HP of the defending Pokemon, and a couple of other things like plus powers or other things you care to mention. Effectively, you created a card that can almost ensure the fact that you're going to donk your opponent's Pokemon and also go first. It's also probably one of the mentions on this list where they had to do a hard reset on the format purely because of the combos that this card enabled. So I just feel like this card in a nutshell like had so much promise, and I think that there's an alternate universe where this card was conducive and healthy to the game. But all in, I just feel like with the tools they gave it and with the attack they gave it, I feel really strongly about this just being not healthy and not fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what's important for context as well is like what made it super broken and crazy came a long time after its release. those things kind of came in a bit after. But I had this in my top 10 deck video. This is my number one because I thought like it was so powerful that this card forced a midseason rotation. And to me, that's like the ultimate achievement. Like if you can do that, you're a pretty good card, pretty degen card. So I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, I think honestly, like the rule change, that's like one of like the dumbest decisions I've like ever seen in my life. Like I don't understand what they were thinking. Like the whole point of like putting restrictions on going first is to like balance the game. They're like, oh, we're just not going to put restrictions on going first. Like,
yeah,
what?
It was as bad game design as I think it was like decision making after it came out.
Yeah,
with what they did release and like what they did change, I think that's what made it broken, right? So like the card itself, the design, like Curtis said, it could be one of the best design cards of all time had that second attack not been buffed to all hell with a lot of favorable rule changes after.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, like, I was just going to say, like, you also, like, when you're thinking about the card, you're also thinking about the fact that it was designed for a best of one environment, which also adds, like, extra salt to the wound a little bit, because now you're also creating a card that's, like, super donk. Like you're creating, like, a format where donks are incentivized now because of the card you've enabled and the tools that, like it has at its disposal. So like, you know that, like, you know, when you're designing a card that this card is going to take advantage of the stuff that already exists. But then you also combine it with the fact that we're playing best of one formats, and that like example we talked about where like a lot of the cards on this list are going to reduce that skill gap. I can't think of another card that like probably cripples like that gap from like a spectrum like this to like a spectrum like this just because of like it existing.
Yeah, I think a common trend we've seen on this list is like cards that like enable the game to end turn one are just like bad for like fun, for game design, skill gap. So this is probably the worst offender, I think, of pretty much all the Pokemon that we've picked on this list. So
it's been a half hour since I've given you an update, Curtis. So it's 2-on, 2-out, bottom of the ninth. The Giants are threatening, and your number 9 hitter's at the plate with our guy with the nastiest fastball that we have on the team.
Okay.
And he just grounded out, and the game is... No, we didn't. Error. Okay, never mind. Carry on. Game's still on.
Well, we're here then. I'll send this one to you, Ciaran. Ciaran, how heavy do you think Sableye is?
Oh, that's another good question. I think ghost types are hard because, like, in theory, they should be like very light, right? But Sableye has like the gem with it, so I think they include that. I'm gonna say 40 pounds.
What gem is it? Did they ever clarify?
It's like a ruby or something, I think. I don't know actually what it is.
Unfortunately, I'm a geology major, so this is something right up my alley. It does change. It matters, guys. I'm gonna go with 70 pounds.
Wow. All right. I'm gonna like rope myself into this because I would have like guessed something very similar to you, but we're all collectively really bad at this. It's 24.3 pounds.
See, like, why is this like way lighter? Marshado's like the smallest guy.
There's some funny ones like. I forgot like the funniest one, but there's like a really small Pokemon that like says it's really tall or really heavy, and then
some of them
do
are
like
really
size
bad.
comparisons.
Yeah, like some of them are just awful. They make no sense. I'm like crying right now. The Jay's about to get walked off, so let's move to the next one before I like lose my mind.
Nice. Okay, so we're into the top 3 now. We're going back to... Okay, we're kind of cheating here. We're putting 2 cards together because I think we couldn't pick which one to put. There are 2 cards, Team Rocket cards. I think thematically, I actually love the Team Rocket cards. They look super cool. They have the admins, but they always get toxic effects. So we have Team Rocket's Sneak Attack, and we have Team Rocket's Trap. So Team Rocket's Sneak Attack, it's you look at your opponent's hand, and you shuffle a trainer back into their deck. So like basically kind of similar to Airy, but like as an item. And then Team Rocket's Trap is you flip a coin. If you get heads, you shuffle 3 random cards from your opponent's hand into their deck. So I think it's pretty obvious why these are really stupid cards. Because if you go first, you can basically just like actually hand wipe your opponent turn 1. Like let's say your opponent starts with like 2 bench Pokemon. Like you can literally just go like sneak attack, flip heads. They have 0 card hand. If you flip 2 heads on sneak attack, the game's done. And this existed at a time where supporters weren't a thing. Like all trainers were just items. So you could like run through your deck like Professor O, pill all this, play like item finder. It was very easy to like recycle a lot of these cards. So I just think it was very unfun to sit there and just be like, all right, well, I guess I don't have a hand because I went second. I don't even know what else to say.
Oh my god. The Jays got walked off on a wild pitch. Okay. What I'll say is Sander would have been the world champion like 8 years in a row had he played in this time and the format just stayed. Like, these cards are crazy, man. The no supporter thing is insane. I mean, you look at Airy now, and Airy is like a very like mid card. It was kind of overhyped when it came out, but like the thought that Airy as a supporter is still considered potentially good. You look back on these cards, you're like, oh man, this is something. The flip a coin if heads thing also adds a lot of comedy to it because like you're normally a heads away from winning or tails away from losing.
Yeah, there was another card back then. So I put this like I was considering it. It was called the Chaos Gym. Do you guys know what that card does?
Oh yeah, if you played Magic card format, you know it.
Yeah. So yeah, if you actually that's so true. If you played Epic Splash, you know this card. So it's if you play an item or a trainer card, you flip a coin. If you get tails, the item card fails, and your opponent can use the item card. So it's like you would strip your opponent's hand, and you could put this stadium. So even if they top deck like a Professor Oak, which is like research, they had to flip to even use it. So it's just like pure degeneracy. I just don't really understand the point of them printing these cards. Again, like I feel like a lot of the cards from back then would benefit greatly from the card saying you can't use this if you went first.
Yeah,
but
this is probably the most self-explanatory entry on the list.
Yeah, another card I considered similar vein was Lass. It's a base set card where like you and your opponent show each other your hands, and you both shuffle all the trainer cards back. It's a similar idea. Like you can just like brick your opponent, but you got to go first. You got to set up all your guys. So. Yeah, they love these like degen like hand disrupt effects back in the base set era.
Yeah, I also think that this is like where the power of Erica's Jigglypuff really shines, is because it exists as part of a format where like you could just like nuke your opponent's hand. Because like there was also another card, like an Imposter Professor Oaks card that could effectively judge your opponent. So they'd go to 4, you would play like your Rockets cards. And so you didn't even really need to flip heads, because even if you just hit the one where you could look into their hand and pull the card, if their hand was 3 energy and like Professor Oaks or Computer Search, you just bin the Computer Search and now like their hand is unplayable. So now you can even save the trap card for like when you might need to like reset your hand lock combo. So I think like on all fronts, like as bad as like unconditional like capture effects are, I almost feel like unconditional like hand control cards off the rip are like even just saying that out loud is silly. So I don't even like you guys said, this one doesn't really need double down. In fact, probably the only explanation is like maybe why it wasn't first. But I feel like it came out so long ago that like maybe everything was busted back then. And there's also kind of that like weird wink wink was like Wizards of the Coast trying to punt Pokemon for Magic the Gathering situation that may or may not have been happening. So like, I don't know, but these cards are bad. Like, really bad.
Yeah, I think we've seen like honestly like anytime like hand control or lock has become like tier 1 decks, like the Oranguru control deck, the Sableye control deck. It's always just whenever you can do a combo like that, just too broken. But yeah, moving on to the top 2 now. In second place, I think a lot of people might have thought that we were going to put this card number 1. We have the Lysander's Trump card. This might be like the craziest effect they've ever printed on a card. So it's a supporter card. You and your opponent shuffle all cards from your discard back into your decks. So yeah, you could just like basically almost reset the game. Like every card you've used, every resource just goes right back into the deck. Curtis, why don't you tell a story of like one of your most infamous decks you've ever made and like how it like abused this card to win a big tournament for you?
Yeah, it was Michigan State's. We would always like most of the Toronto or Ontario player base would kind of drive to that one. That one was one of the more popular ones. But effectively, me, a previous player, Aziz, and Mace, they were the kind of the first ones to really pick up on like the power level of this card. As soon as it like the translation came out, they were already in the lab cooking up ideas. I was more so like late to the party, but effectively, as like we were all like collectively like tinkering with ideas, it kind of came on us that like, all right, this card exists in a format with things like hammers, with hypnotoxic lasers, with super scoop ups, with all the degenerate cards that can exist. So kind of like one of the ideas we came up with was like, why don't we just throw all of the worst trainer cards in one deck with Trump card and effectively reuse them every turn with the help of things like roller skates, acro bikes, trainer mails, while also combining it with Seismitoad and things like Head Ringers. And I'm throwing out a lot of cards here, but just kind of take my word for it. All of these cards are bad. Like, they could all probably make this list. And it was all in one deck. So the purpose of the deck and how I eventually won that states was the deck was effectively an item lock. Play through all the toxic cards that have ever existed within this block, and then play trump card to reset your deck and play them all again. And so you think of cards like Crushing Hammer, 50% chance to like mill in energy, it's all right. But if you can play like 4 every turn, then like how are you ever possibly going to stabilize energy? And it was a really, really toxic deck, no pun intended, but effectively like it went so unchecked that like it was kind of like one of these things where you almost had to play it. Like I remember winning Michigan State, so then the following weekend was Ontario provincials, and I went up against like 4 variations of the same formula, and I was like, all right, I guess the rest of the player base is caught on. So not taking credit for something, but this was also one of the rare examples where a card got like hard banned. So we're talking about things like Sableye forcing a reset. Well, this card, instead of like forcing a reset, it's one of the rare times Pokemon were like, yeah, let's cut it up. Admit we made a mistake and never bring this back. But it was such a bad card. Yeah, it was just such a bad card because I think this is one of those cards you have to marry with the rest of the cards that exist with it. Like, it's impossible to kind of decoup this card from what existed with it. So, I think all in, this card just like created a really unhealthy like game state with everything that existed around it. And maybe one of the things that kind of goes unheralded with like poor design is when you eliminate like different styles of win conditions. So I think like as we're talking about like different ways of winning the game, like decking people out, or even like the skill in resource management, which is a huge skill in the Pokemon game, you've eviscerated all of that. Like, you've printed a card that effectively removes so much like variation of like that aspect of the game that, I don't know, it just seemed bad in the moment. It seemed bad all the way up to the point it got banned. And who even knows like what would have happened if they like left it unchecked? It would have been one of the worst worlds of all time, I think, if if they didn't make that decision.
Yeah, I think so we kind of saved the discussion for this, but like the card got banned when Shaman came out. Because what Curtis just described, like you could basically do all that combo plus play Shaman and like draw through your deck to get all the cards even more. There was one regional played in that format, and basically all the decks were just like Shaman and Seismitoad, Shaman and Trevenant, Hypnotoxic Laser, Super Scoop Up, Trump Card, do it again. And I think they were just like, okay, this is the most like unfun, unhealthy thing. Like, we need to ban this. I think I hit the nail on the head. Like, it takes away like, 1, a win condition, and 2, just like a part of the game that's resource management. I think the other deck that I think really broke this card was the Executor deck at the same time as that. So there was like an Executor where its attack was literally 10 damage, but its effect was your opponent can't play supporters. But what you could do is you could play like the Trump card, and you could play like Hypnotoxic Laser to do damage, and just like basically like you lock your opponent from drawing cards because they can't play supporters, and there wasn't really a lot of like Pokemon based draw back then. And then like, yeah, you just play like the Crushing Hammers, the Head Ringers, Super Scoop Up, all this stuff, and like you just keep recycling it. So it like you said, like once people figured out that combo, like we saw a lot of degenerate decks, and those just like weren't fun to play against, and like, yeah, like you said, just like kind of threw out some of the core principles, like the TCG.
Yeah, that was one of the eras where I looked at like from the outside and I saw the game and I was like, yeah, nah, I will not be rejoining this. I think of like the first card that comes to mind for me is like, so the first thing that I think about is like, okay, has this been reprinted? Like, has this effect ever existed before? And the first thing that came to mind for me was Hippowdon level X. I don't know if you guys remember Hippowdon level X.
That's a really unique effect.
Yeah, very, very unique effect. Never really took off, but like super cool effect. I feel like that may have been what was on the cards for Lysander. Like, that's kind of what they thought Lysander's trump card would be. But instead of just devolved into this, like, just whatever we're talking about here, it's just insane. Like, we've never seen it since, thank God.
Yeah, I think the card would still be, like, pretty insane if it said, like, you can only use the effect of Lysander's trump card once a game. But they just, like, kind of left it unchecked. Like, the Hippowdon Aneil mentioned, like, I think the ability was once per game, where it was, like, you shuffle, like, all energy attached back into the decks. I think all, like, cards in the discard back into the deck.
Yeah.
No, it's just it's sorry, yeah. So it's all cards in play, not supporters in Pokemon.
Oh, okay. Did it put the trainers in the discard?
I believe it says all cards in play. So
so it would only reset like energies and stuff then.
Each player shuffles all cards in play, excluding Pokemon supporter cards. And so it's just energies and tools and stadiums, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's like a really good point, right? Is like, I think with some of the cards we've mentioned, like me personally, like having played the game for as long as I did, and like having met people from like all sorts of walks of life, like one of the criteria on this list for me personally would have been like if I had lost personal friends playing the game because of a card existing. Hypnotoxic Laser, Sableye, and especially Trump Card are definitely like examples I can point to for where people were like, this just isn't fun for me anymore. Like this game doesn't make sense. Like why am I like spending resources or like emotional equity playing this if like I'm just not getting any return on this? But I do have like a funny story with Trump Card where the exact same Toad deck I was talking about with like all the nasty cards in one deck. I'm not going to name the person because they're still an active player, but I'm in the finals of a major and my opponent was so frustrated because of like, it is frustrating to play against. I'd have to imagine like you're just there watching your opponent take 5 minutes per turn, like shuffling their deck, ripping through every card, playing every card again. It's a frustrating experience where like midway through the game, they were just like trying to like, I don't know, like out degenerate me where they were reading every card. So I'd play like Crushing Hammer. They're like, oh, can I read that? Oh, Hypnotoxic, can I read that? And at one point, I think he just turned around and started talking to his friends mid-game. But for me, I was like, I'm going to win this major. So you can troll however you want. But I just remember that moment being like, wow, this has to be like the most unfair experience. Like if it's unfun for me, somebody that like wants the strategy and like the satisfaction of playing this game, I can only imagine how bad it is for them. And I think that's that card in a nutshell, is just like unfun.
Yeah, it's actually funny because like I actually liked the format, like the Primal Clash one. I think it was still a fun format because there were a lot of cool decks, but like the decks that have used it the most were just the unfun ones to play against.
That era was just
it was an interesting
chaotic.
block.
Yeah, it is a very interesting block.
Yeah, like I haven't read Jason's blog for this format, but I imagine like the intro would be like the chaos format of the Pokemon TCG or something like that.
He actually, if you go to his blog, it stops after Black and White, I think, because he's like X and Y is when the game got too degenerate for me, so I quit. Or wait, is there an X and Y block on his thing? I can't remember. If
he definitely played back then because he was like he was like really like I played him at like Montreal provincials like in top 8 or top 4. Because he was playing the Executor Trump card deck that you were just talking about.
He made
that was his favorite deck.
Sorry to cut you off, but he made for Toronto like provincials or Ontario and Quebec provincials. He got a fully French Executor deck because he thought it was fun.
That's pretty baller. That's pretty baller.
But anyways, continue with your story.
Yeah, no. I was just gonna say like he definitely played, so he understands like the chaos of like what existed back then because it got to the point where like I was like, all right, if I know I'm gonna play Jason, I might play like the one deck in format that like I don't know if it was I think it was like a Mega Manetric deck that like kept resetting its energies. So I was kind of like, all right, if I play him, I'm just gonna auto him because this is like the one deck that like self-sustains its energies. Like I can hit you for 110, I pitch it back to that guy, I can switch, I pivot back. And so I kind of felt like it was unfair when I finally did get a chance to play him because I knew he was gonna play it and I knew I was gonna run into him at some point. Because like the good players always kind of did back then, but he knows the experience, so I'm sure his sentiments are probably pretty interesting on that front too.
Yeah, he has X and Y on his blog, and at the end he's just like, "Okay, I got bored of playing Pokemon and went and played Retro."
Take to be honest, same.
Me too.
Yeah. Sick.
All right,
let's get into number 1. This is like ultimate degeneracy.
Okay, I think most people can guess what number 1 is since it hasn't showed up yet. But we put Arceus, Dialga, Palkia Tag Team GX. Honestly, when we were discussing this, we're like, what if we just put tag teams as number 1? Because I think it's like the worst mechanic the trading card game has ever had. But no, ADP is the poster child, and it definitely is the biggest offender. I just think like anyone who played Pokemon when ADP was a thing just knows how stupid it was. Like taking an extra prize card, one, it basically suffocated single prize decks. Like, you couldn't play single prize decks, which is a huge part of Pokemon. I think an archetype that so many people enjoy playing. Like I love playing single prize decks. 2, it made the game super fast. Like, if you knocked out, like, a tag team, you would take 4 prizes. You knocked out a normal GX, you would take, like, 3 prizes. So, basically, after you tag teamed, like, did the GX attack, you would just take 2 turns to win. So, the game's really accelerated. And I've talked about this before on the Shift Gear, where, like, I don't like formats where it's super fast. There's not a lot of turns, because there's not a lot of turns. There's not time for like strategies to develop, decisions to be made, like decision paths to go down. There's just less skill and less chances, I guess, to make mistakes. I think the other thing that like just showed in this era how degenerate it was, like every deck started playing Crushing Hammer. So if you went second, you could try and get rid of the energy to stop their like GX attack. Which is just like insane to me that like every deck in the format had to play this objectively poor card just to have a fighting chance when you went second against it. It was just like unfun. No one enjoyed it. It like completely took over the format. And I do think like it was probably one of the darkest eras for the TCG. And like one of the only good things about COVID is that like this wasn't really a format in real life.
Yo, low-key, we neneeded COVID. Like, it stopped. COVID was the hero we needed. This was, oh my god, this was ass, man. Like, here's the thing with this card, okay? Here's the thing. It's one thing to give it the GX attack that it has. It's another thing to give it full blitz as its attack. It was 150. I don't remember what the actual attack was called, but 150, search for 3, attach it. Very, very strong. And the problem with this card was there just wasn't very much counterplay. There wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. There was Mewtwo that could stand a chance by hitting it with the 300 attack with Charizard turn 2. That was always good, but it felt like it just devolved the game into a state where you're relying on Crushing Hammer flips, but then like when Zacian came out with Metal Saucer, it's like, okay, all bets are off. Like we have this Metal Saucer, we have Energy Switch, like we're getting this up whether or not you like it. I just think it brought the game down to a deep, dark place. And I'm not a huge fan of the tag team format. I have them all built. We play sometimes. They're fun like once in a while, but then after 2 games, you're like, no, back to the binder.
Yeah, whenever you guys try and pull those decks out, I'm like, I'm not playing this. This is like my least favorite format of all time.
He abstains. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know, Curtis, you didn't play during this era. I honestly didn't play that much during this era too. I put some online terms during COVID. I'm like, this is so stupid. I'm not even gonna wait. Like COVID was so there's nothing to do, and I'm still like, I'm not playing like Pokemon because of how dumb this is.
That might be like the ultimate cosign for like how bad of a card this was. If we're saying there was nothing to do and I still didn't want to play Pokemon because of this card. But there was like a brief window where I was like in Toronto still, but like maybe like kind of toying with the idea of moving where I'm at now. And I was playing, but I like quickly realized how bad the format was because it was that tag team format. Like I remember being at like League Cups and just like, it was like, wait, you mean like prize mapping just means I need to kill 2 things? All right, this is pretty easy to figure out. Like I just kind of felt like all the stuff I loved from the game just got like completely stripped away. And as like, that's like maybe tag teams as a whole, but like this card specifically, I just think like it kind of hits all the boxes. Like it was oppressive. Maybe people had fun with it. Like I don't think personally like that part of the game would be that fun. And then you're like severely like debilitating like certain things from coming. And it kind of felt like it was the chain reaction behind like it was the card, but then like subsequently like everything else after it just like kept making it more and more broken. It was kind of like, all right, stop. You can stop now. It's already broken. All right, Mawile. All right, it was good. We don't need any more. Oh, Zacian. All right, Metal Saucer. It was just, it kind of felt like it was like an avalanche. Like maybe in a vacuum, it's fine. It's even worse in expanded because you have the double dragon energy. So it's like on all fronts, like on like just like everything you could name. It even like coined the term like, I think it was like boss. Like it was just the idea that like, because you had a card that strong, like you enabled extra prizes, you enabled extra damage, you had a self-sustaining attack on top of like this like Zacian card that had a built-in like draw consistency engine on top of like also like hitting like as hard as you possibly could in that format. It just felt like you've like created just like the worst thing imaginable in a card. And it is actually kind of, like one thing like maybe we could like commend Pokemon on is the idea that like, I've been on the record with like maybe you guys with like other people I've played the game. And then during the tag team era, I'm like, this is it. Like to me anyways, the game is done. Like there's no way to salvage this unless you press a hard reset button. Yeah. But somehow, some way Pokemon like found a way to kind of like swing the pendulum back. Cause I feel like now we are getting like more interesting game states, like maybe the NIC finals that I just watched was like probably some of the most like high level skill intensive like Pokemon I've seen. So I think that like like on all fronts, they were able to bring the game back. But I was so convinced during the tag team era that like we had hit a point in the game where they were valuing simplicity and like accessibility to the game, and like really lowering the skill ceiling to the point where I'm like, I think this is it for Pokemon. I think we've hit like a threshold.
There's a sinusoidal graph where Pokemon just does that over and over and over. I would not be surprised if in 2 years we get some sort of hyper-aggressive, just crazy, beginner-friendly kind of format again, just to rope people back in. Because that's kind of what they do, right? Over time, it goes up and down and up and down, but I've never seen anything in my life gatekeep as bad as that card did.
Yeah, I remember, Kurt, you and I have had that discussion back then about, like, how do you fix the game? Like, even before COVID happened, I actually took a break from playing Pokemon because I hated the tag team format that much. And, like, if you know me, like, you know how much I love competing and playing Pokemon, but it was even enough to, like, make me be like, all right, like, this is not what happened to the game I love. Like, unironically, like, I don't know, it was just such a bad era for the game. Like, they had this, like, Twitter trend, like I posted a few weeks ago, where it's, like, you put, like, your favorite deck, your, like, least favorite deck, like, least favorite cards. Like, my least favorite deck was, like, Mewtwo Mew. My least favorite cards were, like, Welder, Marshadow, and I just put tag teams as a whole. I'm like, this is, like, the pinnacle.
Put a tag team GX marker and called it a day.
Yeah, I was like, tag
well,
teams.
This actually segues us pretty well into one of the cards we also wanted to mention, and we're way over time. We're getting hit with a hurricane tomorrow, so we got to sharpen it up. But what we're going to talk about is Welder. I want to talk about Welder for a second, guys. Okay. How do you guys feel about Welder?
So, like I said, it's one of my least favorite cards of all time. It's, like, interesting because, like, I don't know if that card in particular is bad design. It's just, like, the format it was in, it was just, like, horrible. Like, if you played Welder turn 1, especially going first, you just put so much pressure on your opponent. Like, you were so far ahead that it was almost impossible for your opponent to mount a comeback. It also had a lot of support back then, like the Giant Hearth, the Fire Crystal, the Flint. So you would almost, like, could always get the energies. But I just, like, have so many nightmares of, like, Mewtwo Mew GX using, like, Deoxys's, like, GX attacks, but 200 on all my, like, NKs when I would play Malamar. Like, it just felt like one of those cards where it's like, if you drew it, especially going first, it's kind of like VIP Pass. Whoever gets it, like, has such a huge advantage. And it just, like, snowballed the game like crazy. I thought that card was definitely, like, in my consideration for, like, worst design cards of all time.
Yeah, because I feel the exact same way. I was actually going to make the VIP Pass comparison too, where I think that, like, the card's strength in conjunction with, like, the cards around it and the format it was in helped create an environment where it was kind of like, we like beaten this horse to death now, but, like, when you reduce the skill ceiling so low where my opponent hit Welder and I didn't, there's probably not a lot I can do as somebody that considered myself a good player to, like, maneuver my way out of that. Like, there just wasn't, like, it was that strong of a card. And I think, like Ciaran said, like, the things around it, like, I remember decks back then, you either played 4 of the Pokegears, or you played Jirachi, or some, like, or Dedenne. Like, you needed ways to get Welder as fast as possible and as consistency as possible. I remember that regionals we attended, like, as a group. I remember we were just like, when we were playtesting, it was kind of just like, should we just give ourselves, like, Welder turn 1? Because, like, we need to test. So, like, we need to verify that, like, what we're testing is working. So it's kind of like, yeah, just take the Welder. Like, you would miss it. And then you'd be like, can I just take it? Yeah, take it. And, like, for the sake of testing, like, we needed to operate with that. But, like, how silly is that to, like, say out loud, right? Because, I don't, like, maybe feel as, like, bad about it. But I definitely agree with you guys that it's, like, definitely worth a mention because of, like, maybe the format and the era it operated in. And I think primarily it was because of the strength of the tag team cards.
Yeah, 100%. If we ever make a video, like, worst design mechanics, like, I'll spoil it now. Tag teams, like, number 1, not even close.
Number 1 culprit.
It might be more interesting with, like, that debate if it's, like, everything except tag team.
Yeah. I just at the start of the video, disclaimer, be like, Ciaran has too much of a bias against tag teams. We're not including it in our rankings.
You almost just have to remove it for the video to be interesting.
Yeah. Cool. Just to finish up here, like, we can, like, rapid fire maybe some of the other cards I think we considered. I think all of us considered the Oranguru, the one that put 3 cards from your discard to the bottom of your deck. What I thought was interesting about Oranguru is I remember it took the community a really long time to figure out how broken it was. And then I remember when the DDG group figured out how broken it was, they just started, like, destroying tournaments with their, like, Orangurus or Arc decks. I don't know if the card's, like, poorly designed. I just think, like, it got used. It's, again, one of those things where, like, there's a lot of toxic cards. Like, you could just keep recycling, like, I I don't like
Surge was the big problem.
Yeah, Surge. Like
yeah,
you could,
Surge.
like cards to discard.
Surge honestly could have been on this list as well. Like you can discuss
it was also,
Surge being a degenerate card.
Yeah, there was the hand combo, right? Because it was like you could use a Rangaroo to do the red card Lieutenant Surge Delinquent combo.
Yeah.
Like it was like such a like because you could
Delinquent. Guys, we missed.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't Delinquent. It was like the Pidgeotto control deck. You would play Jesse and James, discard 2, Mars, discard 1. So
but I'm saying Delinquent in general, though.
Oh yeah,
like, yeah. Delinquent was a.
That was pretty bad. Now that I'm thinking about it, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, that one was discards. It's discard Stadium, and your opponent discards 3 cards, right?
Yeah, that was pretty degen.
Shout out my boy Nico. He he always played one Delinquent in his deck, and he wrote like "got him" on his version of it, like because we just play like locals and stuff, and he was "got him." I was just like, man, I got hand locked, but what can I do?
I think Delinquent's not that bad because like you could play around it. Like you knew like if you ever put your hand to 3, you're playing into Delinquent.
Yeah, knowing the card exists, I think helps because it forced you to play a certain way, which I guess could make it a little bit unfun. But I also think like by itself it was fine. It was just like the combo of like everything else that existed with like the Pick Ice Axe. I think it was Bryce and Benelba was the name of it. That like
you like milled cards.
Wasn't wasn't a combo where like if your opponent got to like I think it was like pretty like it was like a pretty big amount. It was like 12 or 15. Where you could like Lieutenant Surge, Bryson Benelba twice, and then Macargo GX.
Yeah, you're right.
It was like a one turn, like you could be like up 6-1 on prizes, or 1-6 on prizes, and your opponent just needed to get you down to like a certain threshold. I don't remember the exact. It was that, right?
It was like it wasn't the Oranguru like Pidgeotto. It was like the Chinchino deck, but I think it was with Oranguru.
Yes. Yeah. Zacian, Chinchino, and stuff, and then eventually you got yourself to a point where your opponent couldn't win.
So I just looked up. So Macargo's GX attack is discard 5, and then Belelva was discard 3 cards from each player's deck. So you could, I guess, discard 11.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
There's crazy. A lot of random degen combos. I think we touched on most of them.
Yeah, I think the other thing... go ahead, Curtis. You had one to bring up.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think like the big one people were probably expecting, but we kind of decided was more of a translation issue instead of design issue was the Slowking.
Slowking, yeah.
Yeah, you guys want to touch on that? Because I feel like that one was just kind of a mistake. Like it wasn't really
we hit that one
the way
in
it was
our
designed.
Top 10 cards video, I think.
Yeah.
We went through that one pretty in depth, but yeah, it was basically just a mistranslation and it just ruined the whole card.
I think that was like more so like like Wizards of the Coast translation person diff instead of bad card design. But I agree, if the card was designed how it like was misprinted, I would say it's definitely up there for number 1. Other card that I think is an interesting debate, like I consider DCE in my like poorly designed cards. So it's double color synergy. It's literally just double turbo, but it didn't have the drawback of -20. And it really felt for a really, really long time like they would design cards like with this in mind. Like everyone's attack would always be like 1 colored energy plus 2 colorless, or their attacks would just be straight up like 2 colorless. It just like felt kind of unhealthy because it's like you kind of had to like play this card and like build around it, and it made things almost like too splashable in a way. And like we discussed it with Mewtwo. But I don't know if it was necessarily bad game design, but it was just like the card was just like so staple for like a long time in the game, and they definitely designed it.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's like every format it's been in, it's like almost gravitated around that, right? Because you've had like Night March, Garchomp Garchomp SP, Gardevoir. Yeah, so it's just kind of felt like such a strong card, but I almost wonder like, do we blame the designers on like the Pokemon they built, knowing the card existed versus the card itself? It's definitely on like the most powerful card list. Like DCE in like a nutshell is like just like dumb strong, but it's definitely an interesting one. And I almost feel like with that, we probably segue into another card that maybe we never mentioned, which was Seismitoad, which might not have ever been good if it wasn't for DCE. But I kind of felt like Seismitoad, if it wasn't for like, it was one-way traffic in terms of like item lock. But I also kind of feel like it was also a byproduct of everything that existed around it.
Yeah.
And it was kept in check with other things. Like it wasn't like, there was no way, if you're just playing a straight up Seismitoad deck, you're probably losing to the Virizion Genesect deck, or you were losing to a Groudon deck, or the Kyogre Primal decks that existed. Like, it didn't feel super oppressive. was like later in the game once it got like its 100th tool in like Trump Card and Shaman, where it was like, all right, yeah, now we got to stop this now.
Yeah, I agree. It always felt very fair. It was very annoying to play against, but it never felt like I'm like, this card is like too broken. But I guess it is. You could, I guess, say like, again, it's like an item lock, which is super strong, but it was a kind of like conditional item lock. So I don't know if it was that crazy. Other like degen, I put Stantler from Ruby Sapphire Power Keeper. If you've played that format, you know that card's kind of taken over. It's just
I like Skyfield personally.
Skyfield's
that's a card I put on there too.
Yeah.
Skyfield was just super annoying because of like just game state wise. Like
that's exactly what I put it there.
It was like it was impossible to maintain your board, and I've always been somebody that's like kept like a really neat, succinct like board. And so like when I like look at my board, I'm like, it would just give me brain fog because I'm like, wait, did I bench this? Like, is this my discard pile? Is this like, you know, like...
And small playmats were still kind of a thing back then. Now, like, all the playmats are huge, but back then, the old, like, Harkle Silver playmats were, like, standard size, so it wasn't a lot of space. I didn't like that card.
Yeah, you'd have to, like, kind of, like, stack your bench, like, 4 and 4. Actually, one of my favorite decks of all time played Skyfield, so I kind of like it, even if it's objectively a little...
The Gardevoir one?
No, that deck, yes, but also the Raichu Crobat deck. That's one of my other favorite decks of all time.
Yeah. I kind of felt like Skyfield, it was interesting at least, right? Just because I've always like appreciated when Pokemon like maybe steps out of their comfort zone. Like Aneil made a comment like historically, like do we look back and like has this ever been done before? Like Rain Dance, we've seen Rain Dance or like Energy Trance or like we've seen the same stuff over and over and over again. We've even seen like the trade-off discard draw 2 effect on like every other thing. So it is kind of cool when they release something like your bench now becomes 8. Like the Eternatus, and then now we have that turtle coming up. Yeah, I don't know. Like to me, anyways, like I kind of like liked the fact that they were stepping out of their comfort zone, but I also side with Aneil where like it was just hella messy.
Yeah, big time.
So that's like a one card where it's poor game design, not for actual gameplay, but for like how it affects like the neatness.
We hit all the corners here. Hit everything.
Yeah. I think like a card people feel really strongly about that I personally have really loved was a Power Spray. Because I think like there are certain people that like hate how oppressive the card was on the sense of like if you went first and you set up like your board, you like effectively had just a tremendous advantage to like Power Spray your opponent setup from ever taking off. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't like really love the bluffing aspect of Pokemon. It kind of felt like it created a new dimension.
Yeah.
Like within the game itself, like a mechanic within the game. Just because like Pokemon's always been like one way, like you've never had to worry about like what your opponent's doing on your turn. So to me anyways, I loved that aspect because it added a lot of like skill I thought I had within that realm. But, yeah, I don't know. I've loved the card, but I would be pressed if I know people are going to be like, how the heck did you guys not mention Power Spray?
Yeah, I think most people like that card to be honest. They think it's cool at least. I think that's like why like they would like it.
Yeah.
So okay.
All right. Well, did we hit everything? Unless there's something I'm missing?
No, I think this was a really fun episode. I think we like these episodes the best. They're the most fun. We like run out of stuff to talk about if we just talk about standard all the time. So if you guys have ideas for like what episodes you want to see us do in these like slower weeks, let us know. I think for sure we're gonna start like doing some like look ahead to Worlds, like the format we're at the table. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I get a lot of feedback that people love our like history episodes, so we'll keep making them if people want to keep watching. Thanks to Curtis for coming on. I think it was really great to have someone with such a deep knowledge of the history of the game. So I think when we do these episodes, we love getting different guests on who have different experience, which is awesome. So Curtis, do you have anything you want to say before we end the show?
No, thanks for having me back. It's always fun to do this with you guys. I think in the future we know that I talk too much, so we'll just like account for extra time on the episodes. But yeah, it's always fun. I'm always happy to do this. If you guys ever want me back, just hit me up.
Sweet.
You're always welcome, bro. Yeah, this was awesome. We love doing this stuff. Let us know in the comments what you think we may have missed, what we hit on. There's always different opinions. We like to hear them all. Last time we had like some like closeted like no profile picture man just dogging us the whole time. And honestly, if that's you, bro. Like I don't mind. Just
we love hearing your. It was me.
Yeah, like
caught me.
It was definitely somebody we knew, just absolutely dogging us. So we appreciate all y'all being here. We hit our milestone of 1,000 subscribers, so thank you all for being a part of this journey with us. We've done things that we never thought we'd be able to do. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Curtis, for recording with us as always. And I will go face first into a hurricane tomorrow. Good luck, everybody. Have fun, and we'll see you. We'll see you next week. Peace.
Later.